Peace and blessings. How you doing? How you doing? Peace and blessings. Hey wife, peace and blessings. It's freezing. Peace and blessings. Peace and blessings. It's gonna be a very, 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 very quick. Praise God. My face looking all dry. Excuse me guys, my face looking dry like this. I'm doing drywall, so praise God. What's up, sis? Sister Shamara, God bless you. So I want to talk to you guys for a minute about taking the risk. Taking the risk. This thought came to me as I was meditating about Jesus. I was meditating how oftentimes he did things that were so unorthodox and so out of the box of tradition or what could be understood or comprehended. Not just for mankind, but also for people that had a religious belief system. He did things that was so unorthodox and so different. Imagine if we went to church and the pastor called up someone, and as they were ministering to them, we see the usual things. We expect them to give them a word, to pray for them, to lay hands. All these things are commonplace to us. But imagine if we just seen a pastor just spit on someone. What if he just spit on you like all in your face? How many of us would be offended? How many of us, if that happened to us, we'd be offended? But how many of us just watching would be offended? What would we say about that pastor? Well, we say he a powerful man of God. We might not say that. We might have said it the week before, but we might not say it this week. Why? Because we don't understand. It wouldn't make sense to us why he felt it necessary to spit on someone. To spit on someone. That is something that's nasty, it's disgusting, it's unclean, it's disrespectful. So in our paradigm of understanding, how can something that's nasty, unclean, disrespectful, unsanitary be, in relationship with something that God would want to do, or something that God would use to bring some type of healing or restoration or deliverance? That would shock the whole church. It'd be a controversy on the new pastor spits on member, But yet Jesus did this. Jesus spit on someone. He spit on someone. Now, obviously, the blind man that he spit upon, that blind man, his eyes were opened. But what does it take for a person to be in a place where they're okay with spitting on someone because they believe God told them to? What type of person do you have to be? What type of mindset do you have to have? What type of heart condition, what type of relationship with God do you have to believe that God is telling you to do something that according to their word or according to their Bible, to do something that's unclean to bring a healing? According to the book of Leviticus, this is something that's unclean, unsanitary, in so much that you weren't even allowed to come into the temple. You weren't allowed to worship, to make sacrifices, or I would just say worship, because of this unclean thing. But yet Jesus, hearing from God, believes that God is telling him something to do, something that's opposite of what the Bible is saying, or their Bible. I believe in the Bible 100%. But I'm going into a thought of taking the risk. Jesus took a risk. He took a risk at that moment. He had to risk looking like a heretic. He had to risk looking like somebody that is in rebellion. He had to take a risk of looking like he was super spiritual or hyper spiritual. He had to take a risk of people looking at him like he don't have balance. He had to take a risk. He had to risk people's perception of him. He had to take a risk. You know? And he took that risk, and obviously he was being led by God, so he saw the reward. The blind man's eyes was opened. And it made me think, you know, let's say, you know, you believe that God called you to be a prophet or a messenger. Well, messengers, obviously you're going to hear from God. You're going to get messages from God to give to other people. You're going to hear things from God that others may not hear. So you're going to understand things from a different perspective. But one thing, any person that is called to be some type of messenger of God, every person that I know, or me myself, that's called to be a messenger of God, the one thing that we don't want to do is tell you God said something and he hasn't said it. That was always my worry and fear. Like, God, I don't want to ever say you said something that you didn't say. You know? And that's many of our, you know, our cross or our fear. We don't want to be trying to speak on God's behalf in a time where he hasn't spoken. But I was thinking that to actually be a real prophet, hear me out, to be a real prophet or to be a real messenger or a person that represents or speaks on God's behalf, you have to be willing to be a false prophet. You have to be willing, like, in other words, you have to be willing to take the risk, like, you have to be willing to say, you know what, I believe God told me this, and step out whether people are going to believe you, God didn't tell you this, whether people are going to say you false, or people are going to say, you know what, that doesn't line up with the word. People are going to say these things, but you got to be willing to take that risk. Otherwise, you'll never be able to walk in it. Like, you'll never be able to walk in the fullness. Like, you understand? If you don't take the risk, like, and I say take the risk because it's a high risk, high reward. If Jesus wouldn't have took the risk and spit on that man's eye, then that man blindness wouldn't have been healed. You ready? That man blindness wouldn't have been healed if he would have took the risk. I say it's a risk because sometimes we want to step out on faith and we don't know what's going to happen. We just believe in God by faith. Sometimes you step out on faith and the first thing we think about is, what happens if nothing happens? How are people going to look at me if nothing happens? That's the risk you got to take, you know? Well, I look like a smoke right there. All right. You know they called Jesus, hey, peace and blessings. You know they called Jesus a sinner. Jesus did a miracle. He healed this blind man's eyes. And you know what they did? Because they couldn't explain what he did. You know, the reason they didn't like Jesus is because Jesus was like a high school dropout, you know? The reason that the Pharisees didn't like Jesus, yeah. The reason they didn't like Jesus is because he was like a high school dropout. They called him rabbi, which means that they identified that, you know, he went to some type of schooling to be a rabbi or a teacher. Like, good, bro. You know? But they were always questioned by whose authority do you have the right to teach? When they were asking that, they basically want to know what school? We know that you went to schooling, but what school did you graduate from? Like, they want to know what school did he graduate from when they ask him about whose authority do you teach?
School of Hard Knocks.
Oh man. So they realize that Jesus has some type of teaching, like concerning some schooling, but they didn't know from who ordained him or who graduated him to be a rabbi. Like, so I'm just reading between the lines when they call him rabbi or when they ask him about whose authority. Basically, he started school to be a rabbi, but he never finished it.
Did the fat man leave?
So they always had a problem because they was always trying to figure out Jesus. Like, they always trying to doctrinally figure him out and stuff like that. But one thing about the Lord is that he didn't really care about what people thought about him. Like, he was willing to risk
bring up
people's perspective or perception about him
that would run
to cause something to happen in someone else's life. And it really inspired me thinking about this. They said, "Oh, he's a sinner." They said, "Oh,
just so no more dust gets in there."
Hold on.
Alright.
So you scared to park?
Good. No, I'm parked. You're good. I feel like
He said, they said, "Oh, he's a sinner." That was their way of trying to explain Jesus away. When they were saying he is a sinner, they wasn't saying like he a person that commits sins. Like, what they were saying was that he a transgressor. Like, in other words, what they were saying about the Lord was that we really can't receive him because he's somebody that don't conform to the ways that we do things. Like, he's a sinner. Like, he's supposed to be trained to be a rabbi, but he coming spooky. He coming extra spiritual. He know the words say that, you know, it's unclean to spit on people, but yet he's spitting on people. So basically, he shouldn't be a rabbi. He a sinner. He's a transgressor. He transgressed the ways of the rabbis. Like, he transgressed the law. That's what sin is. Like, so he going against the grain, like, and he being super spiritual, and he doing odd stuff that don't make no sense. You feel me? But Jesus was willing to risk that. Like, Jesus was willing to risk people looking at him like a transgressor. Like, Jesus was willing to risk people looking at him like as somebody that go against the grain. Like, Jesus was willing to risk them looking at somebody that, you know, that didn't finish the training that they felt he should have. Like, he was willing to risk all that, like, just so a man's eyes could be open. Like, and it really provoked me, and I just share it with you guys because are you willing to take the risk? This is the question that Jesus asked the disciples. He said, listen, to walk with me, I'm going to empower you. You're going to do miracles, signs, and wonders. I'm going to use you to turn the world upside down. But one thing I'm going to ask you, are you willing to take the risk? That's what Jesus was all, he asked them in different ways. You know what? He said, can you deny yourself? Like, deny yourself doesn't just mean deny your flesh or deny your sinful nature and all of that. Deny yourself mean in the moment that it may look, you might look like a fool for my sake. What I'm asking you to do, you might look like a fool for my sake. People might not understand, like, but can you put yourself aside for the benefit of somebody else? Like, can you look like a fool for the sake of faith? Okay? And it just made me think about it, like, you know, am I willing? Like, am I willing to take that risk? You know? People look at, oh, Brother Mo this, Brother Mo the prophet, Brother Mo. But, you know, to give a message from God, you never really know. I never really know. I just know in part. It's never like, I just know absolutely. I just believe what God has given me. The bits and pieces, he drops something in my heart, whispers something in my ear, give me an unction in my heart, show me a picture. And I just, by the grace of God, be able to put it together to give somebody a message. And I'm just believing by faith that somehow it applied to their lives. You never know. You just believe and you just share it by faith. But I take the risk, because now other people say I'm a prophet. So if somebody else hears somebody say, "Oh, that's a prophet right there," then they expect that I'm gonna always say something that come to pass, or it's never gonna be wrong, or I'm gonna be absolute 100 correct. I'm not absolute 100 correct in anything. But the point I'm saying is, I always take that risk. I just take the risk. Maybe I get it. What if I get it wrong this time? What if I let somebody down? But I'm willing to take that risk and share again. Jesus said, "Can you deny yourself? If you love mother, father more than me, if you can't hate your mother, brother, father, sister for my sake, can you pick up the cross and follow me?" All these things he's saying is, what I'm about to do in your life is worth it, but are you willing to take the risk? Are you willing to risk it all? Are you willing to risk the crowd? Are you willing to risk the applause? Are you willing to risk the support? Are you willing to risk your image? Are you willing to take the risk? I pray this just provoke you just to think, what risk are you willing to take for God? What are you willing to lay on the line for God? Peace and blessings.